So that's why I'm so excited to introduce to you our next two speakers. Josh Brahm is back, and this time with Rebecca Haschke from Justice for All, and they are going to help us understand how to communicate and share the great apologetics that we learned this morning, and I think that you're really going to enjoy it. So please help me welcome Josh Brahm.
Thanks. Welcome back. I'm on. I don't know. Am I on? I think I'm on. I feel like I can hear myself in my own head, but I don't know if that's telling me anything. Oh, I'm on. Now I'm really on. All right, well, if that music is not enough to get you pumped, then I don't know what will. This is a very surreal experience for me, having DJs open up. That's pretty interesting. Well, welcome back. If people were robots, then all we would need to do in order to change people's mind is have the best arguments. But you and I both know people are not purely logical creatures. People are complicated. People are very emotional. And so one of the things that we also need is good dialogue skills, because persuasion itself is not going to be enough. So much of what it means to have good dialogue skills is knowing how to help a person get into a place where they're more likely to change their minds. One of the things that we've been learning on our team as we've been talking to pro-choice people is that for us to create an environment where the person is most likely to change their minds, we need to be thinking about making them feel emotionally safe. Now, when I say emotionally safe, I'm not talking about the crazy kind of like the safe spaces thing that leftist college admins are trying to force on the campus. I'm not talking about that. And I'm not saying don't be willing to offend people. I'm saying be wise enough to not needlessly offend people. If people feel emotionally safe, they are more likely to change their mind in front of you because they don't feel like you're going to belittle them because they changed their mind. When we go into conversations about abortion, what happens a lot of times is people get into fight mode, where they're just trying to guard intellectual turf. And so I think a lot of what it means to have great dialogue skills is how do you graciously get this person out of fight mode into a place where they're receptive instead of defensive. It doesn't matter how brilliant your argument is or how beautifully you speak it if they can't hear you. Or if they are listening to you, but they're not receptive, they're not going to be able to change their minds. So after 3,000 conversations, going through kind of the fire of 3,000 conversations, we like to talk about the nitty-gritty little things that we have figured out help create a better environment in our conversations. So we teach a lot of practical dialogue tips in our course. We're going to talk about 4 of them with you today. I'm going to give you 2 practical dialogue tips. I'm going to invite my friend Rebecca to come up here. She's going to give you 2 more dialogue tips, and then the fun's going to start. Because then we're going to do about a 20-minute practice dialogue in front of you and show you kind of what it sounds like in real time when I actually talk to pro-choice people. This can be really helpful to put all the pieces together. Okay. Tip number 1, ask lots of clarification questions. This sounds simple, but it's so important, especially for those of you, I just have to put this somewhere else because I'm so distracted by this. It's so much better. It's in my head. You don't know what it's like in my head. Okay. It sounds simple, but it's just so important for those of us who talk to a lot of pro-choice people because we can get into this mode where we kind of feel like, I've got this. I understand pro-choice people. I've talked to 10 of them. I know what they think. Like they say this thing, oh, I know exactly where they're going with that because that's the person 2 people ago said. And then we get into this place where like we feel, like I think it's good for pro-life people to feel confident, but sometimes we start getting into this place where we kind of make fun of pro-choice people. We kind of think of them as simple or stupid. I mean, that's not going to help your dialogues. It's also going to make you a lot more likely to strawman people. Have you ever had this thing where people like attack not your argument, but a way dumber version of it? Oh, it's so frustrating. Don't be those pro-lifers, because pro-life people strawman pro-choice people too. If you ask a lot of clarification questions, you can avoid this. We want to become like a detective, like be really, really curious about who this person is and what is making them tick. So I'm asking a lot of questions like, you said you're pro-choice. I have no idea what that word means to you. I've heard that label used to define so many different positions. I don't know much more about you now than I did before. Flesh it out for me. What do you mean when you say you're pro-choice? There's a podium there. I ask questions like, you say that you're against late-term abortion. That's a very common view. What for you is the difference between the third trimester and the second trimester? Like, we're asking clarifications for questions. We're learning more about their views, what is going on for them, so you're going to be in a better position to respond to them in a way that's going to be helpful to them. That's pretty basic. I want to spend a little bit more time talking about this second dialogue tip, though, because this one is going a little bit against the grain of what has been taught in pro-life apologetics. This is not, I am so grateful, I really mean this, I am really grateful for the awesome pro-life apologists that have come before us. This is an area of respectful disagreement with some of them. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time trying to convince you that we're right, basically. We believe that you will have better conversations if, generally speaking, you don't make arguments with question marks at the end of them. We think you should make arguments with statements instead. I don't think you should do this thing where it's like, well, it seems like if this is true, then isn't that true? I think that's not as helpful. A couple things we're not saying. We're not saying to not make arguments. Make arguments. Love arguments. Just make them with statements and not questions. This is an absolute rule. There's exceptions. This is a general rule. This is also not a good debate strategy. If you're going to go and do a debate with a pro-choice person with like podiums and stuff, totally use arguments with question marks. Use a bunch of them because they're really rhetorically powerful. And that's precisely why you should not use them in your one-on-one conversations. Because question marks can make people feel like they're being rhetorically pushed around. And we don't want to, and I'm not saying like all of these arguments with question marks are like these inherently leading questions that are inherently doing that. They're not. The point is, it can make them so often feel like they're being rhetorically pushed around. And then a wall goes up. And we don't want walls up between us. Like so much of, when we're trying to think of arguments and dialogues, we're trying to figure out how to get around the walls that are already there. Because usually, they already have a wall up. I talked about this in the earlier session. Like, they've got a wall up before you even open your mouth. Because they spent probably years rationalizing to themselves to be pro-choice. It's not a baby. It's not bodily rights, pro-lifers, whatever they've had to tell. They've been rationalizing to themselves their pro-choice views for years. They had a wall up before you got to them. So when we go up to someone who already has a wall up between us, and then we start asking them the kinds of questions that can kind of make them feel like there's another wall up, it's kind of like this scene from Return of the Jedi. You guys remember this? You got to put it on the screen. Or they're not going to get it. Awesome. Okay. Sorry, I didn't warn them at all. You're awesome. Okay. So it's like the scene. So if you guys remember, they're trying to get into the battle station on Endor. They've got to get in. R2-D2 is going to try to hack into the system, but then he's shot by the first stormtrooper who's ever hit anything in his life. And then, right? And then Han Solo kind of shrugs and says, I guess I'll hotwire it. And he pulls out this panel, because apparently the Galactic Empire is using the same technology as old cars. So he pulls out this panel, he starts messing with these wires, and eventually there's this little comedic gag moment where he clearly put the wrong wires together. Instead of the door opening, a second layer goes down. That's what we do when we walk up to people who already have a wall up and we start asking them the kinds of questions that make them feel rhetorically pushed around and another wall goes up. We don't want to do that. Instead, we want to have our strategy when we make our arguments is basically like we're trying to use the worst poker strategy ever. We just put all of our cards on the table face up. We're just trying to be transparent. Our generation craves authenticity. Research has shown that our generation is more skeptical than any other generation in the past when we watch advertisements. Why? We don't want to be psychologically manipulated. So we just want transparency. Just be transparent. This is like the pulling the curtain back. Here's what's going on for me. I've got this weird view. I think embryos and toddlers are the same, etc. Just pull the curtain back and make your argument. It's just trying to be the worst poker strategy. I'll give you an example of this. Last year, my brother and I had, and I can't remember the number, it was over a dozen conversations or meetings with the same Mormons. I'd never studied Mormonism before. I hadn't read the Book of Mormon. I knew like a very little bit about Joseph Smith, but not much. And then there's this one Saturday. It was my first Saturday home in like 3 weeks. So I was resting. I think I was watching The Office for the 8th time or something like that. And the doorbell rang. The doorbell rang. And I opened the door, and it's Mormons. And they were charming and pushy enough to get in my house. And once they did, we started having this amazing conversation. And then I brought Tim in for all the rest. So there's kind of an unfair advantage thing going on. But it was awesome. And there's so many things I could tell you about all these meetings. We learned so much about persuasion. But I'm just going to tell you this one story. We had 3 back-to-back meetings about the Trinity. Mormons don't believe in the Trinity. They have a totally different metaphysical view. And the first meeting was sort of just re-educating them on what the Trinitarian view is. They've been taught that Christians are so stupid they basically think 1 and 3 are the same thing. Like, that's basically the thing. So Tim's got paper and a pencil. He's diagramming out this whole thing and trying to help them understand what we think about the Trinity. And then a lot of it after that was just like us swapping Bible verses. Like, they would have a verse and we'd talk about a verse, but then they wouldn't respond to our verse. They would just throw out another verse, like Christians do when they're debating anything, right? We're not responding to the other person. We're just giving our own pet verses. And so Tim said something at the end of the second of these meetings. These are like meetings 10 through 12. Tim said something at the end of the second meeting. He said, I'm not ready for us to give up on the Trinity yet. Let's do one more. Come back in a couple of weeks. I want to try one more time. I think there's more that we could discuss here. But there are way too many verses in the Bible about God's nature for we can't debate all of them. So let's do this something different. Let's do this David and Goliath style next time. You bring your 2 strongest verses. We'll bring our 2 strongest verses. And we'll let them duke it out and see if we can figure out who's got the right view. And here's the thing. In the spirit of transparency, I'm going to give you our verses right now. Pull out a pen. And Ryan, my favorite one of them, he whips out this pad of paper and a pen so fast. I'd never seen that he had it with him, but he whips this thing out real fast. And Tim gives him not only the verses, but in syllogism form, how he's going to make the argument for the Trinity in 2 weeks. And then he said, okay, now you guys go home and you study up. And you figure out what your 2 best verses are and how you want to respond to our 2 verses. And I remember watching them. And they were sitting literally at the edge of my sofa. I had never seen them listen so intently to anything that we had to say. Why? Nobody debates like this. Like, this is not a good debate strategy. Trump and Clinton didn't do this last year. Like, trade notes, like, here's what I'm going to say. That's not what happens. But this isn't a debate. It's a dialogue. I don't want us to win the dialogue, whatever that means, just because we're quicker on our feet. Let's make it like we've got the goods. Fine. Have all of our notes. Go study up and come back. There's nothing up our sleeves. That's the attitude. So you could say to approach this person, well, if thinking makes us persons, then doesn't that mean squirrels are persons? Or you could just say, well, the problem for me is this. It seems like if thinking makes us persons, then that would mean that squirrels are persons because they can think. Does that bother you? What do you think about that? So I'm going to finish making my argument, I'm going to end it with a period, and then I'm going to ask them to respond. I'll give you one other quick story. So it's a really convenient story to tell because it's not that often that you get to meet your antithesis. Like, ever seen like superhero movies? The best supervillains are the ones with like the opposite traits from the superhero. Let me tell you about the day that I met the Joker. We were at Portland Community College last spring, in spring, April 20th, 420. I don't know how every pot day I end up on a college campus. But campus smelled interesting. I talked to a lot of people who thought they were really philosophical. It's like, you're a utilitarian who's high. It's a different thing. We were on this awesome spot on campus. Our pictures that day were pretty ugly because we were inside, but we were right in front of the cafeteria. Anyone who wanted to get lunch or had the munchies, they had to come through us. It was awesome. So I ended up talking to this girl, I'm going to call Rachel for this story. We got a picture of it. I'm sitting on the pool. You got to put up the picture again, sorry. So I'm sitting on the pool table, like I do. She's 5'0", so it's really important for me to, be relaxed and kind of get down to her eye line as much as I can without getting on my knees and being weird. So I'm sitting on the pool table, and we're having this conversation. And she's way pro-choice. Like, I'm not feeling really optimistic in my inner monologue that's going on. But we're talking. I'm asking a lot of clarification questions, and occasionally I was making arguments. And when I was just making my argument. We were talking for about 20 minutes. And then Gabriel showed up. Not the angel. Something else. Gabriel, I've thought a lot about this statement. I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that Gabriel is the most obnoxious pro-life person I have ever spent time with on a college campus. And I've been doing this for 15 years. Like, I've spent a lot of time on campuses with great, loving pro-life people. I have also spent time on college campuses with really annoying pro-life people. This is a pretty big statement. Let me paint the scene for you. I don't have a picture of him. I purposely did not take pictures of Gabriel today because I wanted to forget him. I can't. He's burned into my memory. I can see him right now so clearly. Gabriel is really tall. He's like 6'3", 6'4", really short military-style crew like haircut thing, and a full leather, black leather trench coat, like Neo from the Matrix, which I didn't think was a thing anymore, and I've since been assured it's not a thing. And he had one expression on his face, an expression that said, "I'm the smartest person within 1,000 yards of this place." So I'm going to talk to you for a while for my own amusement because I love talking to idiots like you. He looked like that for like 4 hours before he finally left. That's the one expression. I tried to get him away. I couldn't get him away. He stayed to spite me. He didn't like me either. I know. How? So Gabriel walks up. So I'm there when he first shows up. He walks up. You can put that picture back up. Here's what happened. I'm going to paint the scene. He walks up to our, there you go. So he sees there's a pro-life thing going on. He later told me he's part of the Students for Life Club. He's not part of the Students for Life Club. But he walks up and he gets directly on the other side of the pool table from Rachel. Thanks. And he gives her this kind of smug look. And he says to her, he interrupts our conversation. And he says, "Do you believe this?" And I don't remember the exact question, but the subtext was, "Do you believe this stupid thing pro-choice people believe?" And then before she could respond, he asked another one. He said, "Do you believe this other stupid thing pro-choice people believe?" And my heart sank. And I looked at Rachel, and I could see her shut down. And I said, "Pause! Let's have a meta discussion. Let's have a discussion about the discussion." Okay, I've got a question for you, Rachel. I'm kind of weird. I'm really interested in persuasion. So I've got a question for you. We're two pro-life guys. Which one of us is more likely to change your mind about abortion? And instantly she said, "You." And I said, "Why?" I want to know why. Be a good teaching moment for him. Why do you think I'm more likely to change your mind about abortion? And she said 2 things. One, she said, "Well, first, I like your body language. I'm relaxed." He's directly across the table in fight mode. And then she said, and I quote, "And I like the kinds of questions you ask." I was only asking clarification questions. And then when it was time for me to make an argument, I just made an argument. This guy was only asking obnoxious, leading questions, and it shut her down. It didn't help her. So ask lots of clarification questions. Learn about this other person, but when it's time to make your argument, just make your argument. And with a period, not with a question mark. So I want to introduce our next speaker. It's a really good friend of mine. Her name is Rebecca Haschke. She works with Justice for All. I love doing outreach with Rebecca. I've done a lot of outreach with Rebecca, and pro-choice people love to talk with her because she's so dang charming. You can't not like her. And so she's fantastic at talking to pro-choice people. She works with one of our favorite pro-life organizations called Justice for All. If you have any chance in your club to do work, do outreach with Justice for All, please jump on that opportunity. Their staff are so good at dialogue. It's ridiculous. And we still collaborate with them. They're fantastic. If you want to do any kind of outreach, like this is a great group to go and do outreach with. So you're going to learn some dialogue tips from her now. Please give a warm welcome to my friend, Rebecca Haschke.
So this next tip that I'm going to share with you is one of those tips that seems so simple, and yet it is one of the tips or one of the skill sets that we have that most people fail to do well. And it's listening. But not listening to refute the person that you're talking to, it's listening to understand what the person is actually saying to you. And what's interesting about this is that if we fail to do it, it is detrimental to our conversations, enough so that it can actually shut down a conversation. For example, a few years ago, I was with Justice for All doing an outreach in the heart of Denver on the Auraria campus, and I encountered this woman who's pro-choice. Not only does she have differing views than me, but she was not very happy that I was there, and she didn't really like my position. So it was a pretty, you could say, heated discussion right from the moment when she walked up to me and we encountered each other. And I had to labor over getting that conversation to a place where she calmed down, and we were actually able to then start talking about the logic behind the pro-life movement or the logic behind her position as a pro-choice advocate. What's really interesting, though, is that once we finally got to that place, a pro-life man happened to walk past us. And as he walked up to us, he overheard something she said, recognized she was pro-choice, didn't ask to be part of our conversation. He just turned toward her and he asked her a question. At which point, you can imagine that her defenses went right back up. And so she tried to respond to him, and before she could get 3 words out of her mouth, he cut her off by asking her another question. Now, you can imagine my initial reaction to that. I'm sitting there going, no, 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 please don't do this. And do you know what ended up happening? She tried to respond to that question, and he cut her off again, and he asked her another question. And so the third time, she's trying to respond to the question that he has asked her, and I finally decided to interject. And I said, no, 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 hold on a second. I think she's trying to, at which point, they both shut me down. So at this point, you can imagine, like, I'm just watching this conversation, a productive conversation, unravel in front of my eyes. And it didn't take a few more seconds for me to realize I really couldn't save that conversation, because what ended up happening is she stood up and she walked away. Now, this is a prime example, or a very obvious example, of how not listening to someone can shut them down completely. However, I would say that most of us have met a person who has actually given us time to speak. They've given us enough time to respond or to share our ideas and our beliefs. And in the midst of sharing that with them, we feel like we're being listened to, but it's the moment that we stop talking that we realize in their demeanor that they could have cared less about everything we said, because they either have 25 different ideas that they want to share with us, or facts that they want to share that don't have anything to do with what we just said, or they listened to what we said only to refute it. And they came back with all of these arguments against the point or the ideas that were just shared. We cannot listen just to refute or just give them time. It is not enough. We have to listen to understand the heart of the person that we're talking to. Now, you can do what Josh mentioned. You can master those tips that he gave, and you can master this skill of listening well. But if you miss this 4th skill set that we're going to give you, or this 4th tip, you actually, I don't think, will have productive conversations. And what that tip is to find common ground. But finding genuine common ground, and doing this without compromising your position. Now, I'm sure some of you have met that pro-lifer who goes, common ground with a pro-choice advocate? I don't have common ground with pro-choicers. How on earth am I supposed to agree with the woman who says, yeah, I think abortion should be legal because some women can't give adequate care to their children and they're going to live in poverty, abuse, and neglect? I can't find common ground with that, because that's like saying that killing someone is better than letting them live even if they're in a difficult situation. I don't have common ground with pro-choice advocates. Now, what's interesting, though, is that the woman who has those beliefs, I met her last summer at Wichita State University in Kansas, and her name is Michelle. And here's how I found common ground with Michelle. Once she shared those views with me, I actually didn't refute them. I simply asked more clarification questions to better understand where she was coming from. And about 15 minutes into the conversation, I stopped and I said, Michelle, earlier you mentioned that you feel like abortion should be legal, especially for women who can't care for a child in what you would consider an adequate situation, or adequately. And that you feel like it would be better for the child so that they don't have to live through abuse, neglect, or poverty. And she nodded and she said, yeah, I did say that. So then I kept going and I said, Michelle, I want to acknowledge something that I appreciate about you. At which point she was kind of taken back. And I said, Michelle, I actually admire the fact that you seem to care not only about women, but you seem to also care about children. You seem to desire the good for them. And she's like, yeah, I do. And then that's where I got to share that, Michelle, I actually also care for the good of women. I want them to be loved and to have prosperous lives. And at that moment, something key happened. Now, you better believe that the next 30 minutes of our conversation, we're doing things like trotting out a toddler, dialoguing about whether or not the unborn is biologically human, talking about which human beings deserve rights. Do all of us include rights? And how do we determine how we deserve those rights? But what happened when I found that common ground with her, I was standing at a table like this, and she happened to notice that although we both might have signed different sides of the table, that no longer were we enemies across the table. We actually had something in common, and we might have disagreed about how we came to a solution. We wanted the good for women, and we happened to think differently about this subject. And it was like all of a sudden, as though instead of her feeling like we were going face to face in an argument, all of a sudden our postures switched, and we were shoulder to shoulder, looking at this problem together, trying to solve it. And she saw that I saw the good in her. And then she was much more willing to process with me all of those topics that we learn to use to defend the pro-life position. So we have to listen to understand, and we have to find common ground without compromising our position. Now, I want to point one more thing out about listening to understand, because I think this stumps people. Many of you might think, oh, great, you're telling me I have to listen, but if somebody isn't going to feel heard just because I didn't give them enough time, there's something critical that we can do to help them understand that we are listening. And it's actually pretty simple. Help them understand that you want to know by saying it. I can look at this woman, Michelle, if she's given me a lot of opinions that she has about abortion and whether or not it should be legal. And I can simply say to her, Michelle, you've shared a lot of ideas with me. Do you mind if I put them in my words as to what I'm hearing you say, reflect them back to you, and then you can tell me if you think that I understand you well or if there's something that I don't quite get. And in that moment, she actually has the knowledge, because I've repeated back to her what she said, whether I understood, but she now knows that I at least cared enough to listen well and to listen to understand her position. So now that we've given you these 4 tips, I'm going to bring Josh back on the stage, and we're going to do what he said. He is going to be a pro-life advocate over here at this table, and as I am on my way to class or I'm on my campus walking past, he's going to engage me. And you're going to have the opportunity to see if we are able to put into action the 4 things that we think make good conversation. Oh, why don't I ask you a better question? Why do you want to control women's bodies?
Okay, so that's a great question. But real quick, before I answer that, can I ask you a quick clarification question?
Oh, a clarification question, yeah. Why don't you just go ahead?
Okay. Are there any late-term abortions that you think, are there any abortions that you don't think should be, legal, maybe late-term abortions?
Well, I totally disagree with late-term abortions. I don't think they're necessary.
Yeah, okay. So please hear me. I'm not trying to make fun of you, but I'm going to just ask you this. Why do you want to control women's bodies?
Wait, what?
Oh, yeah, because you said that you thought that it should not be legal for her to have third trimester abortions. I'm just wondering why you want to control women's bodies in the third trimester.
But I don't want to control women's bodies.
Right, and neither do I. Like, this issue is so much more complicated than a rhetorical slogan like that. Like, it would be so unhelpful for you if I was like, why do you want people to dismember the babies all the time? Like, that kind of thing is not going to be very helpful. And so, I don't want to emulate the way people talked about politics last year. Like, that was bananas. Like, that's not what I want. What I want, can we try something different? Like, can we both drop the rhetoric and just have a real conversation about something that we disagree about?
Okay, that's fair. Although I'm going to admit that I don't think I've ever talked to anybody for longer than 20 seconds about abortion. But I'm willing to give this a shot.
Great, I'm Josh.
Hi, I'm Rebecca.
Okay, so I don't know that much about your views here. You said you think that late-term abortions are unnecessary. What does unnecessary mean for you?
Well, to me, it just doesn't seem necessary that a woman would have to wait that long to make her decision, unless, for example, maybe her life is in danger.
Sure, but it happens. Like, sadly, that still happens. Like, the laws vary state by state, but there's some women that are having late-term abortions and not because her life's at risk. And so I think we agree that's a bad decision. I'm trying to figure out, do you think that should be against the law?
To be honest, making laws against abortion makes me pretty uncomfortable, but probably it shouldn't be legal after it can survive outside the womb.
Okay, so I have a handy brochure here with some fetal development images. So like, here's a baby at 20 weeks. This is about the youngest that a preemie has survived. Do you think maybe abortion would be okay up until then?
Wow. To be honest, as I'm looking at this, like I'm looking at that picture there of the 13-week embryo, fetus. It doesn't look human completely yet, but that is getting uncomfortably close. So maybe I would draw the line at 13 weeks just to be on the safe side.
Yeah, so I think it's really wise to err on the side of caution on a subject like this. I totally agree with that. So maybe just like clarify for me, for you, what do you think the difference is between the 13-week fetus and the 7-week embryo?
Look, I am not going to be able to articulate this perfect argument for you that you're probably looking for.
No. I'm not trying to paint you into a corner. Like, I'm not about to drop the hammer or something like that. Like, I'm just trying to learn more about your own views.
Okay. Well, I just feel like I'm on the ropes trying to draw a line here, and I thought maybe you were going to press your advantage.
No. There's no ropes. This isn't a debate. Nobody's watching. I'm not trying to score rhetorical points. Like, this is just us. Like, here's what's going on. I'll be transparent. I think abortion's really wrong. I think it matters. And I want to try to convince you of that. And I just don't think people get more open-minded when they're being pushed around.
That's definitely true. Okay, well, to be totally honest then, when I look at the 7-week fetus, I don't think, or the embryo, I don't think that that looks human. And yet, I know that that is a terrible reason to be using. So maybe, is this a question that you can give me some time to think about and maybe ask me about it later?
Yeah, I totally appreciate your honesty. That's fine.
Yeah, and it's, when I say that, I don't mean that I don't want to say that it's irrelevant what's happening inside of the womb, but I don't think it's the main issue. Because, I mean, when you look at that, a child who's still inside the womb is completely dependent on the woman, whereas a child who's outside of the womb is totally independent. And I just think that, I mean, the argument, my body, my choice, really sums it up for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I'm tracking with you. Let me rephrase what I hear you saying, and then you correct whatever I get wrong. I think you don't think a 7-week embryo is a person. Maybe a 13-week fetus is, maybe it's not. You haven't really worked that out yet. But that's not the main issue for you, which is probably why you haven't worked that out yet. Like, the issue for you is bodily rights. It's inside of her body. It's completely dependent on her body. And it seems like if we restrict a woman's right to have an abortion, then like it's too big of a restriction on her bodily autonomy.
Yes. No, I would say that that's probably the best description that I have ever heard of my view.
Awesome. We've got clarity. That's awesome. My clarity is so great in the conversation. Okay. So like we could have a worthwhile conversation about personhood, I think. But given that that's not the thing for you, let's table that for now. We can come back to it later if we want. But like, let's just talk about bodily rights.
Okay. So in terms of bodily rights, this is like a subject that, I'm sorry, I get really emotional in this. So it's hard for me not to get emotional when this women's rights or bodily rights issues come up. Because women have worked so hard for so long because they've been oppressed for thousands of years. Yeah. And I feel like we've actually made leaps and bounds of progress in recent years. And I feel like when a person says that they think that a woman shouldn't have the right to do what she wants with her own body, that if they're willing to oppose abortion, that they just can't care about women.
Yeah, so I'm really glad that you said that. I agree with you. Like, women have been so oppressed for like all of human history and still are to varying degrees, depending on like what part of the world that we're talking about. And that's really tragic, and it's really, really wrong. Like, we're on the same page on that. I'm for women's rights too. But help me understand, like when you said it's a part of her body earlier, like that could have meant a couple of different things. I'm not sure. Like, do you mean that it's biologically a part of her body, like an organ or something? Or do you mean more something like you're talking about her body? It would be too much restriction on her body or her bodily autonomy if we took her right to abortion away.
What you're saying at the end there,
okay.
I'm not talking about the fetus, which has 23 of her chromosomes. I'm talking about the cells in her body that have her 46 chromosomes. And I feel like restricting abortion is putting restrictions on what she can do with her body.
Yeah, okay, so that's really helpful, because I think this is a point that confuses a lot of pro-life people. Like, they think that you're trying to, like, dehumanize the unborn or something. That's not what's going on here. I generally agree. Like, I agree with you that, like, the government generally shouldn't tell people what they can and can't do with their bodies. I'm a small government guy. I generally agree with that. I think pregnancy is this weird case where in order for the government to protect one human person from being killed, they should tell a woman that she can't kill that human person that's inside of her body. Now that might sound weird or anti-woman or something like that, but remember, we've already got common ground on this point. Like, will you agree with me that like abortion after viability should be against the law?
See, and that's where I feel like I'm trapped in that.
Yeah, I think you kind of are. Like, I think yeah, like this is the weird thing about bodily rights arguments is that so many pro-choice people make them and so few of them think that there shouldn't be any restrictions on abortion. But the problem is this, like if the justification for abortion is that a woman should be able to do whatever she wants with anything inside of her body, then that justification is equally true in the third trimester as it is in the first. So I think you basically have to choose. You need to choose between your bodily rights argument and having restrictions on abortion.
See, but that's so frustrating to me because I know what I think about late-term abortions or third trimester abortions, and I don't think they should be happening. But I also don't think that the rest of my view is that unreasonable. I mean, honestly, think about like blood donations, for example. We can't even force someone to give blood to another person. And donating blood isn't that difficult. And then we think that we can force women to go through with a pregnancy, something that's so much more difficult. It does not make sense to me that we can't, or that we can force women to have to go through something so difficult when we can't force people to donate blood.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best pro-choice arguments I've ever heard. Because I agree with most of what you just said. Like, you're right. Okay, so blood donation, it's easy. It's not that big of a deal. It can save lives, and we shouldn't force people to do it. So I agree with you there. I also agree with you that pregnancy can be really hard. Like, I don't think every pregnancy is horrible, but a lot of them are. And to be fair, I'm arguing that abortion should not be legal, even in the case of the horrible pregnancies, unless her life is at risk.
So can you help me? How can you believe all of that and still oppose abortion?
Because abortion isn't just not helping someone. Abortion is killing someone. Like, I think people a lot of times get lost in the distinctions between not helping and killing. And I'll admit, there are some philosophical cases that are pretty confusing, but here's what's not confusing. If I've got a kidney problem and you're a match and I ask you for your kidney and you say no, you're not a murderer. Like, it's not like the same as if you like pulled out a gun and shot me right now, right?
No, of course not.
Yeah, so bodily rights arguments always seem to make this mistake. Whether we're talking about blood donation or a famous violinist in a hospital somewhere or anything else, they always pretend that abortion is just not helping someone. It's not. And that's why blood donation is different. Like, you don't have to help people. You can't kill people, though. Like, abortion is this brutal act that literally destroys the body of an unborn child. Like, this brochure doesn't just have fetal development images. If you turn the page, you'll see some very graphic but not photoshopped pictures of babies who were killed in abortion. And their graphics, I'm not going to force them on you, but they are undeniably relevant evidence. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to view them.
To be honest, I'm pretty squeamish, so not right now.
Okay.
But I will grant you that I don't think that abortion is just not helping someone. I will definitely grant you that. Can I bring up something, though, that's actually really bothering me?
Yeah, of course.
What about women who have been raped? What about women who've been violated in the way that I think is the most heinous way someone can be violated? For the government to think that they can make decisions for the woman in a situation where she should be the only person who is determining what is best for her, for the government to think that, I think is just ludicrous.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer that question directly in a moment, but I need to take a minute and help you understand. Like, I think rape is one of the worst things that I know about. Like, I'm upset because I know people who've been through this. I don't think there are much worse things that a person can do to another person. And if she becomes pregnant, like, I think he's committed multiple moral crimes. He's forced himself on her sexually, but he's also forced her to become a mother. And so now, like, I think he should be in jail for a really, 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 really long time. Because now she's got to make maybe the most difficult decision of her life. She's either going to, carry the child, so a 9-month pregnancy and a painful delivery, and then either parent the child, so it's a very expensive 18-year commitment. If she might offer the child for adoption, which I think is a very selfless act, but it's emotionally painful for most birth moms who go through it. Or I think she'll make the wrong decision and hire someone to kill her child. But the reason that I hate rape is that I think it's an act of violence that's done against an innocent person. The reason that I'm against abortion is that it is an act of violence that is done against an innocent person.
You know, honestly, I don't know what to say to that. But I'm still pro-choice. I'm just not convinced.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like, while I do sometimes see people change their minds right in front of me, I don't think that's the norm. I think most people need to take some time and think about an issue this complicated. And so there's a reasonable version of this, and there's like a cop-out version of this. Like, there's this cop-out version where I think some people are like, I'm really bothered by what that person said, and so I'm going to be intellectually lazy now, and I'm not going to think at all about what he said. I'm just going to pretend like that never happened. I think what you're obligated to do now is to think a lot about this stuff that we've talked about, especially the things that you didn't really have an answer for.
Yeah, I will definitely be thinking about this conversation. There's no doubt about that. But I do actually have to get to class.
Oh, okay.
I'm already late, but
sorry.
I really appreciate that you've actually taken time to have a conversation like this.
I'm so glad you took a chance to come and talk to me. It was great to meet you.
You're welcome. Nice to meet you too.
God
Thanks.
bless. Give my friend Rebecca Haschke a great welcome. Give her a good hand. That's how we do it. So real quick, if you want to learn more, one more shameless plug on the screen, you can get our course, equippedcourse.com, 29 videos. We've got 4 more practical dialogue tips on there that we didn't talk about today. Ongoing podcasts every other week, group activities for your club to master this stuff. Come and talk to us. We've got a booth out there. We'd love to come and talk to you. We've already talked to so many of you. It's been so fun, although I'm starting to lose my voice, but it's okay. It's worth it. Come talk to us. Come ask us hard questions. Thank you so much for giving us your time and attention. God bless.